Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to US Modernist Radio. Join George Smart and Frank King as they talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Visit US Modernist at usmodernist.org, including our Masters Gallery, featuring every home by every major 20th century modernist architect. And don't miss the US Modernist Library, featuring most of America's architecture magazines all the way back to 1930. And now the guys who until recently thought Le Corbusier was a French DAC remix, George Smart and Frank King.
Thanks, Tom Guild. I'm Frank King, and support for US Modernist Radio, as odd as it may seem, comes from Mod Homes Realty. If you're having a hard time finding or selling a modernist house, Sarah Sonk and the angels sang. Mod Homes Realty is a wonderful, intelligent, lovely single lady who prefers Star Wars to Star Trek, and who doesn't? Romantic symphony concerts under the moonlight, dancing to techno, and pomegranate martinis. No, wait a minute. That's her J-Date profile. Oh. Sarah Sonk.
Tom.
Yes.
You missed the Sarah Sonk cue.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Bad board work, Tom. I wouldn't expect that of you.
Like Pavlov's dog here.
Is an expert real estate agent who gets modern like you do. She's totally into it and has experience and track record to close your deal. You can find her at modhomesrealty.com or 919-601-7339. And also sponsored by Quality Fabricators of Benson.
Do they get the angels too?
No angels.
Oh.
No. It's their NASCAR theme. And by Quality Fabricators of Benson, your one-stop shop for anything modernistic. They'll even put a concrete floor in your kitchen for just $1,000. How do they do it? Why, it's easy. By pouring it right through your window. There's no need to take up the old flooring. The mod boys at QFab work for half the cost of real professionals with actual education and experience. I mean, how hard can it be?
Right.
Quality Fabricators of Benson, the ones to remember when you forget to check for references.
I am George Smart. Today we're talking about Fire Island, just 50 miles from New York City. It was one of the few gathering places in the 1950s where gay people could feel safe in a world that certainly did not offer such a welcome. It was also a haven for the creative class and for Hollywood. Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, Montgomery Clift, Truman Capote, Diane von Furstenberg, Halston, Calvin Klein, Jeffrey Bean, and other prominent New Yorkers spent time on this island refuge in New York. Truman Capote wrote Breakfast of Tiffany's, his famous book there. It's a pristine barrier island, largely protected from development, with no cars allowed. In the 1980s, Fire Island was decimated by the impact of AIDS, and one of those many lives lost was Fire Island architect Horace Gifford. Our guest today is Chris Rawlins, architect and author of the critically acclaimed Fire Island Modernist, Horace Gifford and the Architecture of Seduction. Chris is an architect who lives in New York City and Fire Island and is the founder of Pines Modern, a nonprofit preservation initiative documenting the island's architecture. He's been featured on the BBC, Travel and Leisure, and the Huffington Post. Hi, Chris.
Hey, George. Good to be with you.
Hey, we're really pleased to have you. Let's get rolling. Fire Island in the 50s and 60s was one of the few places in America where it was even marginally okay to be gay and where the community actively supported this. How did this community evolve?
Well, I think if you look at a lot of sort of gay enclaves, they tend to be sort of at the edges of the earth, as it were. Think about like Provincetown or Key West. And so Fire Island is sort of a similar ilk where it's somewhat geographically isolated. The only way to get there is by taking a ferry. But yet at the same time, it's not terribly far away from New York City, which of course had one of the largest populations of gay people during the 20th century. And so it really was a kind of word of mouth whisper in which there was a community named Cherry Grove, one of about 17 on the island, which beginning in the 30s attracted a theater crowd. And over time, this developed into a gay enclave. And so by the 40s, really, it was well known. But actually, Fire Island has two gay communities, Cherry Grove and Fire Island Pines, which is about a 15-minute walk away. Now, despite having a gay audience to both, they're very different. And this came about historically because if you were, say, a professional in the 1950s, wanted to own a house in a gay enclave, you couldn't really afford to do that because anyone moving to the Grove, they were essentially outing themselves. But there was a new community rising next door called Fire Island Pines, which people discovered I can buy a home in the Pines and be a 15-minute stroll from where I really want to be. And so this sort of jig went on for a good decade or so until by about the late 60s, both communities were heavily identified as being gay enclaves.
Now, did anybody go after Fire Island in the 50s, like McCarthy, for instance?
Oh, absolutely. There were frequent raids on bars and on the sort of dunes where people tended to cavort. And it was, while the community itself was largely supportive, the jurisdiction over the communities was actually with towns in Long Island, which did not share Fire Island's joie de vivre.
That's French.
And so,
Yeah, what is that?
Joy of living. Joy of loving.
yes, lust for life, you could say.
Right.
Would be a rough translation. And so a lot of people found themselves ensnared in that, including the subject of my book, Horace Gifford, who was arrested in 1965 on Fire Island for loitering for immoral purposes, as it was called then, which I have now translated to flirting while gay.
FWG.
Right.
Exactly, yes.
Prior to the Stonewall riots in New York City in the late 60s, I understand Fire Island had an important event of its own. Tell us about that.
Stonewall took place in 1969 in New York City. However, there was a rebellion on Fire Island a year earlier, and the Fire Island residents formed an unlikely alliance with a civil libertarian attorney out on Long Island who found these statutes against deviant conduct and so forth ridiculous. And he said, you're arresting these people for disturbing the peace, but you're the one coming over here beating the bushes and trying to find people flirting with each other. It's you who's disturbing the peace. And he demanded jury trials for all of these people that they were dragging into court and who often would just quietly pay their fine and hope that the press didn't put their name in the paper. And he put an end to it and established a concept of these sort of self-defined communities that can establish their own standards of conduct.
Did Fire Island have a heterosexual community or, for that matter, a homophobic community? Okay.
I think the thing to understand is Fire Island is basically a glorified sandbar. It's 30 miles long. And over time, little enclaves developed which were sort of an easy ferry ride from one of the nearby towns in Long Island. And each of these 17 or 18 communities, depending on how you count it, became an enclave of sort for various demographics. And there's sort of amusing descriptions. You have your sort of white, waspy communities. You have a Jewish enclave.
Okay.
You have, of course, Cherry Grove. And so they're all kind of...
Not always defined by sexual preference, then.
Oh, not at all. There's a great quote from a reporter writing about it, and he says, like a refracting prism, Fire Island takes your glaring white New York light and bends it into 18 neatly demarcated bands, wow, ranging from the bright pink of Cherry Grove to the suburban Dutch boy of Seaview and Ocean Ridge to the grungy shades of Ocean Beach until the spectrum ends in the sterling silver Goyam gray of Saltaire and Pointed Woods.
Wow. Wow.
So that gives you a little feel for it.
Yeah. Yeah, you should be working with the Chamber of Commerce there.
Nothing against Pointed Woods and Saltaire. They're lovely.
Yeah, some of the famous residents of Fire Island include Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft, Tina Fey, Henry Fonda, John Lennon for a while, Chris Noth, Leah Thompson, Ring Lardner, Joseph Heller. Those are just a few of the many people who have come through the different communities on the island.
And it established a reputation, I think, as a low-key place for celebrities to get away to, but also in places like Fire Island Pines, a kind of nexus of a creative class that was inventing incredible architecture, but within this very sort of laid-back and rustic environment.
So let's shift to that. How did modernist architecture take root on Fire Island, and who were some of the architects that started designing these houses?
Well, I think as you get into the 1950s and there's ever more of the sort of creative and largely gay clientele that starts settling into Fire Island Pines, the existing architecture was really a pretty drab backdrop for all of this local color. And so it was essentially demand-driven, in which people were pining for something more. And there was one creative architect working on the island in the 1950s. His name was Andrew Geller, himself a brilliant and quirky and interesting figure in his own right. He built about 7 or 8 houses across Fire Island through the 50s and into the early 60s. But then another person appeared on the scene. His name is Horace Gifford, and he built himself a house in 1961, and almost not single-handedly, but is really the ringleader of a handful of really fantastic architects that defines an entire aesthetic and really builds the entire community in a kind of cedar and glass modernist aesthetic. Gifford himself built 63 homes in Fire Island, 40 of them in the Pines, and in a community of 600 homes, it's a pretty astonishing percentage for one architect to build.
Yeah.
And then, of course, people like Harry Bates come along, who is himself still a famous architect, and he got his start out there. Other wonderful people that we've unfortunately lost to AIDS, people like Earl Combs that no one's ever heard of, but people should. And the list goes on and on. And so you have colorful architects interpreting a kind of rustic modernism for very appreciative people like Calvin Klein, who really get this aesthetic and really want them to push their boundaries in creating something that is both modernist but very much attuned to both the social and the ecological landscape.
So tell us about Horace Gifford. What was this guy like?
Well, he was born in Florida, grew up on the coast, and he was an acolyte of both Paul Rudolph and Louis Kahn. Actually studied with Louis Kahn at the University of Pennsylvania. And I think he really sort of tried to style himself in the 60s as really the architectural love child of Paul Rudolph and Louis Kahn, really combining a lot of their philosophies. And he, as a child and as a college student, would make road trips to see the amazing modernist houses going up around Sarasota, in which Paul Rudolph was the ringleader.
Sure.
And he really transplants that sensibility of these innovative winter homes being done in Sarasota, and essentially transplants a lot of those sensibilities to the summer homes that he was creating on Fire Island. He was tall, blonde, handsome, charismatic, eccentric, bipolar, and he he had it all going on. He was brazen at times. He got his first Fire Island clients, a male couple, by sleeping with them and stole the commission, All About Eve style, from Andrew Geller.
Wow. So talk about a marketing technique.
Yeah, and so he was quite a match for the creative and headstrong New Yorkers that were populating the island.
After he started doing these houses, did it just take off from there? He did 67, you said?
He did 63 houses on Fire Island and a total of about 78 houses. So, yeah, it really just took off from the early 60s. One referral led to another, and he was incredibly prolific all through the 60s into the 70s. His output starts to get a little uneven in the 70s as he's struggling more and more with bipolar disorder. But, yeah, he was a real force to be reckoned with. Always maintained a small office, really wanted to completely control the process. And when you worked with Horace, he gave you a list of 3 contractors, and if you wouldn't hire one of them, he walked. He really had a sense for how to get things done, and he made it happen. And I think if you think about someone like Frank Lloyd Wright, who did these Usonian houses, which is an incredible noble experiment, well, those Usonian houses are sort of flung across the U.S., and so each time he did one of those, it was sort of a local education for some contractor. And what Gifford did, he created a sort of similar experimentation where he developed a kind of catalog of details and an approach to housing. But because he kept it local in one place, the houses actually were affordable and well built consistently.
Did Hurricane Sandy impact Fire Island?
It did, yeah. And, this is part of life of living on Fire Island. About every 25 years, a large hurricane hits and will flatten certain areas. We were impacted by Sandy, but not devastated. A lot of homes right on the beach were damaged.
Okay.
And there was more damage in other communities, but the Fire Island Pines was damaged, but not devastated.
So just on a terribly shallow note, I Googled Horace, and that is one good-looking man. He's built like a brick modernist home. I'm guessing everybody on the island, male and female, just swooned at his feet. It's nobody should be that handsome.
And he knew how to work a good thing. His typical business attire was an attaché case and a Speedo.
Oh, no.
Really?
Where did he put the ballpoint pens?
Oh, I mean, it's funny. I think that in so many ways he was so interesting, and he almost wrote the book for me in places. When he presented one house to a client, he introduced it by saying, "You will now have 20 closets to come out of."
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Had a sense of humor, all right.
Absolutely.
What were Horace Gifford's houses like? Can you describe some of the common features, since we're an audio medium and we don't have slides? I have seen some of your slideshows, which are just wonderful, and I encourage anybody who has an opportunity to see Chris lecture to please take advantage of that. But describe for us what Gifford's houses were like, Chris.
Well, as I mentioned before, you're building on an island where the only way to get to these properties is via narrow boardwalks. And so the houses there tend to be built with lightweight materials. At first, they used to be prefabricated, and he rejected that, even though prefab was all the rage in the 50s, because they were essentially barging these houses over and dragging them across the dunes. And here was someone who had an exquisite sort of sensitivity to the landscape. So he took more of, say, a Fay Jones approach, and he said, you know what, we're going to just bring small materials, lightweight materials, by hand to the building sites and erect them that way. And from really the beginning, there's a kind of an essential grammar. The houses are held aloft on tree trunks or locust posts, ensconced in multiple sun decks, clad with naturally weathered cedar or redwood, tailored with built-in furniture, and framed by an untouched landscape. And also, something that is both charming and endangering about the houses, they tend to be pretty small. An average Gifford house is maybe 1,100 square feet or so,
Wow.
but they
Nice.
feel much larger because they're surrounded by large sun decks. The ceilings tend to be high. They're incredibly airy. And so they work brilliantly as homes, especially as second homes, but sort of modern standards of comfort sometimes, conspire to make people do terrible things to them.
Did Gifford open them up a lot from what the vernacular, the common houses had been previously?
Oh, yeah. They tend to be very open layouts, generous kitchens, sort of open plans, but often sort of situated on multiple levels. So you always have little places to perch. They always feel intimate, even when they're incredibly breezy. I used to rent his own house, which was this astonishing assemblage of 4 towers arrayed in a pinwheel with a flat breezeway in the middle, and that breezeway had sliding glass doors on either side that all collapsed and disappeared. And so I would sit in my living room during the day, and birds would fly right through my living room, not realizing they were in the structure.
Whoa!
Wow. I guess you got to make sure all the windows are open when that happens.
The only problem was when you closed the glass, it was still very transparent. So there were a few dazed birds who had a concussion on the glass.
Yeah.
But when it was sunny, it was perfect.
You were involved as an architect restoring and updating a 1972 Gifford House on Fire Island. Tell us about that one and what challenges it presented in the renovation.
Oh, it was a real honor because it was one of my personal favorites. It's basically composed of two ellipses that surround a perfectly square glass living room that is sunk in and has your requisite, bright orange fireplace and so forth. And it was the original clients approached me. They were in their 80s, and they loved their house. They were having some mobility issues, so they said, we want you to kind of gracefully update this for us, make it a little more accessible. And they loved Horace themselves. They were scientists, and he was about 40 when they met him. And the first thing he said to them is, there are two things you should know about me. I'm gay, and I'm manic depressive. So if you can deal with those, I'll be your architect.
Now, was this the couple he slept with, Chris?
No. This was a heterosexual couple.
Okay.
In a community called Seaview, another town on Fire Island. And but they were smitten with their architect nonetheless, and he designed one of his most brilliant homes for them. So I was approached. I came in because it was one of his very best homes, and they had done little to alter it. It was very surgical. There were, fortunately, the same sliding glass doors with the beautiful narrow frames that he specified back then still exist, same company. So we were able to just really kind of bring it back to exactly the way it felt back in 1972. And then I designed a little garage for their motorized tricycles because they were, being as fussy as they were, they said, I'm not going to look out my kitchen window and look at those ugly things. Build us a garage that Horace would love for them.
So how long has that been complete?
We finished that, I guess, a couple of years ago.
Okay.
One of the most heartening things about this whole process for me in writing the book and talking about the Fire Island architecture is people are starting to know what they have and therefore restoring it with a lot more intelligence and care. And so we've had a real wave of modernist house restorations that are occurring in, the proper spirit of things.
Chris, I'm very excited about Pines Modern, which is your nonprofit effort to document and preserve the architecture on the island and also to get people over there and seeing the houses. Tell us about the organization.
It's really an outgrowth of Fire Island Modernists, and I think, for literary purposes, it made sense to focus on Horace Gifford. He was such a great sort of character for a novel-like telling of architecture. But as I mentioned, he was one of a handful of great people. And so pinesmodern.org is essentially an aggregation of all of my research into all of the great architecture on Fire Island. And I'm constantly introducing new homes and new stories. And I do also every other summer, including this September 8th and 16th, or those weekends, I'm giving guided house tours. And so I've had a ball. It came out officially last year. And we just keep going with it. I also have a practice, Rawlins Design, which is what occupies the paying portion of my day, and that's also given me an opportunity to restore some of these modernist houses.
How can people get in touch with you and see Pines Modern?
Just go to pinesmodern.org, and you can see an interactive tour of Fire Island there, and you can also get on our mailing list in which I announce things like our guided house tours.
I want to talk about Harry Bates because we'll be chatting with him a little bit later on in the program. Mm-hmm. He came to Fire Island, I think, in the late 50s, early 60s, and built a little house for himself, and then went on to great fame and recognition designing modernist houses on Long Island. I understand you spent some time with Harry and interviewed him?
I did. Harry is a wonderful man. He is the second most prolific Fire Island architect as far as I've been able to determine. And he got out there, as you say, right around 1960, give or take, and was very active there until 1969, at which point he transferred his energies more to first Manhattan and then eventually to the Hamptons. And at age 90 or so, he is enjoying a brilliant late career renaissance as one of the best modern house designers you can find anywhere. I invited him out there in 2014, and he gave an oral history, and we rode around in a golf cart, and he pointed out all of his projects, because unlike Gifford, I didn't have an archive or a record of his work. So I said, Harry, can you just ride around with me and point them out? And he did, and it was a wonderful kind of treasure trove of a visit. And, you know, when you talk to Harry, he's got that wonderful sort of North Carolina lilt still. He just, in a different way, equally as charming as Horace Gifford was.
There's a book about Harry Bates and his firm Bates Mozzie called Bespoke Home, with a great introduction by Paul Goldberger that you can get at your local bookstore. And I want to encourage you all to get this book. It is a beautifully photographed piece about his Hamptons home primarily, but you also see his first house on Fire Island. So, Chris, there was a lot of sexual energy on Fire Island that you've captured in your book. How did that play a role in community and in the architecture, other than the unconventional sales techniques of Horace Gifford?
Well, and, you know, that was what was so funny. I'm looking at all of these houses and just trying to understand what binds them all together. And, you know, sometimes you look at houses and it's just a matter of looking at construction details. It's they're interested in a certain technological aspect or something like that. But really, these houses are a kind of document of the sociology of a place. And what I mean by that are, if you look at Gifford's early houses, they're almost compound-like, and they're really kind of refuges from a hostile world. And as the Pines itself becomes an openly gay community, and as the sort of Stonewall era dawns, the houses literally open up, and huge glass facades start staring right at you as you walk down the boardwalk or stare back from the ocean. And the houses become a kind of proscenium for an increasingly liberated way of life. Sometimes it's suggestive, other times it's a little more, shall we say, in your face. And I think anyone, whether they are steeped in architecture or not, would enjoy flipping through blueprints and finding rooms with names like The Cave or The Makeout Loft.
Or the Jungle Room, like Elvis's Graceland.
Hey, we have a crack research department. I wasn't aware of that, fellas. On your Pinterest profile, you, my friend, are a silver fox. I when I was looking at it, for some reason I was thinking about Anderson Cooper. I guess I would put you and he in the same on the same plateau.
I need to send a large thank you note and a check for $100,000 to Anderson Cooper. He has made my life so much more fun by popularizing that look.
I don't think he needs the money.
So, Chris, also our crack research team noticed that your name came up under architecture as erotica. So we prepared a little tribute to you for this episode. Most of these words are indeed yours. So, Tom, let's hit it.
His architecture was butch, but in its muscular austerity, free of domesticating bric-a-brac, a hyper-masculine form of drag could also be discerned. His occasional incorporation of a vintage porthole window, stained glass, and Palladian transoms offered a wry, backward glance at what the new generation was leaving behind.
Gifford presented the house to the husky Italian, Bonaguidi. As a series of telescopic spaces, it got longer and longer, hinting at the spying nature of elongating to capture objects in its commanding gaze.
Gifford's early homes were delicately situated into the landscape, less self-consciously beautiful and more demanding, echoing tumult, both personal and societal. The pointed gables, the thrusting hips, and the powerful arcs of Gifford's early mouth-watering confections gave way to a more abstract vocabulary that relied exclusively upon desire.
No, I think you're paraphrasing.
We did borrow a few words.
Anybody else need a cigarette?
Well, that was fun.
That was fun. Chris, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, George.
Harry Bates grew up in Lake City, Florida. He studied at UNC Chapel Hill in bacteriology in 1948, then changed careers to the School of Design at NC State University, where he received a bachelor's in architecture in 1952. He worked for Terry Waugh in Raleigh and then moved to New York City in 1955 for a job at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, working with Gordon Bunshaft, where he spent the next 10 years. He started Bates Architect in 1965 and was in private practice later with Dale Boer and Bob Lunn in New York City before they moved the firm to Southampton in the Hamptons on Long Island in 1980. He took on the partner Paul Mazzi, formerly of Richard Meyer, around 1997, and in 2012 they moved to a building of their own design in East Hampton. Harry Bates has become one of the most beloved and appreciated architects on Fire Island and in the Hamptons. He retired in 2017 to Fernandina Beach, Florida, where I spoke to him just recently. I'm really pleased to chat with you today, Harry. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah. You got started after going to NC State, working for Terry Waugh for a couple of years.
Right.
And then you moved to New York. What happened next?
Well, I was in New York. I worked for 10 years at SOM in earlier days, not the earliest days, but when they were fairly small. It was fairly small.
How many people?
I think there probably were maybe 100, 125, if that. But we were all in one building, in one floor. And the good thing about it, I found out later on from other architectural people, that all the sections in the business all work together. The production end, the design, the specs, the partners, everybody, we all work together. We didn't separate it like they do most of the time. But we all pretty much in there together, and it was fun. That's where you learned a lot. Everything was drawn by hand then.
Of course, yes.
Yes, and it was fun.
What kind of project did you work on at SOM?
Well, the first one I worked on was Reynolds Metals Company in Richmond, Virginia. And that was one. And then I worked on what was the Pepsi-Cola building, which is on Park Avenue at 60th, I believe. It's something else now. But that was very good. And things like Union Carbide, which is something else too. And the last thing I worked on there, I think, was Noxema building in Maryland. But really the last thing I worked on Gordon Bunshaft's own house in East Hampton.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. Did all the drawings for it, and it was very nice. And unfortunately, that house is no longer standing. That was torn down.
You did one of your first modernist houses for yourself, right?
Yes, I did.
On Fire Island in the early 60s. Tell us about that house.
Well, it was only 600 square feet, and it had no interior doors except in the bathroom. It had a core in the middle, or sort of in the middle, that had the kitchen, bathroom, and the closets. And the rest was the living room and dining, and it was just a little open pavilion kind of thing, and it was great. It really was. And from that came other houses. I didn't know I was going to start my own business. It was the furthest thing from my mind, but it did. And after about 3 or 4 years, I left Skidmore and opened my own business there. Boy, I was brave. I think that, you dumb cluck, you're doing that. But I got an office on Madison Avenue.
Oh, nice.
Got an office, a one-room office, and got an accountant and a lawyer in the office, because I wasn't going to work at home. That was a real, no, I wasn't going to do that, because wasn't a professional thing to do. And I remember building the desks myself out of the doors and that kind of thing. And some of the houses that I did then, I think one that's in the book, was for a family, and I was working there at the time. Then I got somebody to work with me. We moved upstairs in the same building into 2 rooms. And from there it sort of generated a little bit bigger. Then I went to 57th Street. And we had 3 rooms there. After about 1980, I think is when I just told the guys, I had 2 partners at the time, it's time to go, we're going out east. They said, what? I said, yes, it's time to make the move, it's time to go. So we moved the business out in the Hamptons, but we were in Watermill. It was a great office. It was just a wonderful office, and we stayed there for a few years, and the owner built another building, and we moved into that, and it was probably the best office I ever had until this new one we did for ourselves. My 2 partners at the time, Bob Lund and Dale Boer, stayed there with us, and Bob left and went back to Minneapolis. Dale left and worked with his wife in the gardening business, in designing gardens and that sort of thing. And he said he told me he was going to leave, and he said, well, it's time for me to leave. And I thought, well, I'll just sort of maybe drift out and not do anything, and maybe retire. But I closed the office there in Watermill and moved to a new office between Sag Harbor and Bridgehampton. It was a group of houses we were doing, and we were in one house. I stayed there for about a year. I had someone working with me and decided I didn't want to be there anymore. I wanted to be in a village. In Watermill, we were on the highway. Oh, boy, that was, you could have been anywhere. So I started looking around for space, and I kept seeing this ad in the paper, and this is when there was really no spaces for prime space in Sag Harbor. And I said, there's no such thing as prime space in Sag Harbor. It's always damp or, because
something wrong with it.
Wrong. It's underwater because it's right there on the water. But I finally went and looked, and it was in this bank building. I thought, oh, this isn't so bad. And they gave me a good price for 2 or 3 rooms. And so I took it. I was there for 20 years probably, I think. I don't know how long it was. But it was very good, and we eventually, over time, took more space up into, finally we had almost a whole floor on the second floor. But it was getting kind of shabby. That's when Paul came to work with me. And that story is interesting.
Tell me that story.
It was in the spring of a year, and I needed someone to work. And in those days, we didn't have the internet much to advertise on, so I put it in the local papers and that sort of thing. And Paul came to see me. He had finished at Catholic University and worked for 3 years for Richard Meyer and for Audrey Matlock, too. And he was going to take a year off, was going to take some time off, and he was going back to school, he was going to Harvard. So he was going to spend the summer doing nothing. His family had a house in Montauk. He was out there with his father in the springtime, and they were lighting a fire. He was rolling up the newspaper, and he saw in the newspaper this ad. It was the ad that I'd put in there. And he said, well, he's getting kind of antsy because he always likes to do things. He says, I'll go see what it's all about. So he came to Sag Harbor to see me, and we clicked. And the only thing I thought about was that I was going to have to get somebody else right away, as soon as he left, because it was only going to be there for 3 months. But I thought, what the heck, it'll be fun, I'll do it. So I hired him, and it was a lot of fun. We had a good time. And I asked him if he wanted to come back the next summer. He said yes. He was going to be there a year and a half, I think is what it was. So he came back the next year, and then I asked him if he wanted to come there for real when he finished, and he said yes. So that was it.
And that was 97?
That was just 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
20 years ago.
And you all have the informal record for the biggest age difference between partners in an architectural firm?
I think so, probably. Probably. Yes.
You were 70 then? And he would have been what, 30?
No, he was 25.
He was 25?
Yes, he was 25.
Okay. So 45 years.
Yeah. Twice his age. Twice his age. And it's hard for people to realize this when they see us, but it works.
It does work.
It does work fine. It worked fine. We got along perfectly.
And your firm has been producing some of the most magical houses for decades now. Just stunning.
We think so.
Yeah.
We think so. It's fun, and we do an awful lot of research before starting on something. And I think the thing that attracts a lot of people is that the houses aren't alike. They don't look alike. I remember one of the first big ones that we did. It was really a big house, and these people had interviewed several architects, and they told us, after they chose us, they said, the reason we chose you is because we had no idea what we were going to get. I thought, that's pretty good.
So how did you do the research? How did you customize for your client?
Well, we just researched materials, the area that the house is going to be in, if there's any history to it. There's a lot of history in some of the places out there.
This was in the Hamptons primarily?
Yes. For instance, one that's being finished now is in what used to be potato fields right on the dunes. And when they tilled it, there were these patterns back and forth. And so the house sort of mimics the patterns. It just does, and that it works this way. It's hard to describe it. You'd have to see it to see this. But that's one thing. And in Montauk, there's a house that's rather high on a hill, and it fulfilled what these people wanted. They wanted a grand camping site. Well, this is a grand camping site, but it's all open, and just things like that, just little things. It's hard to sort of zero in on them, but we researched the area, certainly. Anything that they've been involved with there or anywhere. It's sometimes subtle, but it works.
One of your favorite houses, which you must have done some research for, is the Tree House on Fire Island. Tell us about that house and that owner and how that house was special.
Well, the owner was an interior designer in New York, rather prominent one. He came out there, and I remember when he came to see me, we went around looking at houses that were built, and he was ready to buy one on the water, on the bay side. And I asked him, I said, are you sure you want to do this? Don't you want your own house? Yeah, he did. He wanted his own house. So looked at property and found a piece that was one block off of the bay. It was heavily wooded, and up on the second floor you could get a view of the bay and the other way to the ocean too. And that's what sort of led to that. Well, there were a lot of upside down houses out there, so people could get views of. Now it's also built up and wooded that you can't see the water at all. But then we could. And that's how that house came about. And he liked it so much, and it was built out of the roughest of materials. The cypress was supposedly 1 by 12, but those pieces of wood were 11 by 3/4, and then some would be 1 by 12 or something. They were all different sizes. And they had watermarks on them. The more the better. He liked it that way. And he's the one who didn't have any artwork in the walls there because he liked it as it was. And he said he wanted the architecture to be the decoration, which was
to stand for itself,
which was nice. And it's still there in its original way. I think they may have added a pool, but that didn't affect the house a little bit. But it's still there.
Your houses are all over the Hamptons, and
yes.
Your houses tend to be very modern. But predominantly the style in the Hamptons is quite traditional. Colonials and Spanish revivals and things like that. Why do you think people choose that style primarily?
Well, I've thought about that a lot, and it's a lot of the people don't know that much about architecture. They know they want a house, and they see these big houses that look like something grandmother had or mother had or somebody that they know had. And it's a form of security to them and a form of continuity that people will think maybe they've been there or their family's been there for 45 years or 50 years, and they like that feeling. So that's one of the reasons that I think they like it there. They like that type of architecture. When I started doing things there, that was when the first modern houses were built out there. And there were few and far between, but they were there. Some of the houses are still there, most of them are not.
Norman Jaffe, Charles Gwathmey.
Yes. It was about the same time. The Gwathmey houses were there. And then they went through this period of everything was traditional, But I didn't fall for that because I didn't know how to do it, for one thing. I didn't know. So I stuck with what I knew how to do and hung in there. And we've seen the modern style coming back, or it was always there, but there weren't many people doing it. They were afraid to do it. A lot of that is for investment. People building these houses for investment, and they think, no, I'll never be able to sell it if it's too modern or contemporary.
I noticed that besides being beautiful, your houses also tend to be rather modest in size. They're not 10 and 20,000 square foot McMansions.
We've only done one or two that have been upwards like 8,000, 9,000. We're doing one now that's in Southampton that's huge. It's for a Dutch family with 3 or 4 sections of the family, and they're all going to be there at one time, if they are. So it's built that big.
That's more like a hotel, really.
It's huge. It's taken a long time to get the permits and that kind of thing. It's just taken forever. But usually they are not that big. Generally, they're smaller.
And people generally are elated to have the smaller square footage inside a modernist house.
They are. We've seen them going back to smaller things rather than doing these useless things where, there's so much square footage and 2 people live in the house.
We're sitting in your latest creation, your own house here in Fernandina Beach, which is just stunning. It's 1,000 square feet in a traditional neighborhood of little cottages.
It's a very modest, middle-class neighborhood.
Did the neighbors go up in arms about the design at all?
No, it's amazing the reaction I've had to the house. It's so totally different from anything around here. And I can be outside and young people will stop and tell me, that it's a cool house, a really cool house. I like it and all that sort of thing. And it's been gratifying that the response has been positive, completely positive. I haven't heard anybody say anything. They wouldn't tell me. I don't know. Maybe they would.
I think they would these days. They would tell you.
I followed the one in Raleigh. When you problem you've had with that, God, that's gone on forever. But no, the reaction's been very positive, and I've tried to think why it's positive to them, and I'm not sure, but I think it just the simplicity of it, and it's very simple, appeals to them. All of a sudden, they see something that's not difficult to understand. Although they don't know how to find the front door here, they walk around the house and because the front and the back are the same. But it's been a positive reaction.
Do you feel that people who live and grew up in very traditional houses get converted a little more often once they get inside a modernist house?
Yes. I have a friend who grew up next to me here in Florida. And she lives in South Carolina, in Camden. Very traditional, low country, all that sort of thing. She came in, she saw it, and she said, well, she loved it, and she said, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool traditionalist, but I love this house.
Yes.
I think when they see everything, it's so simple, it's so nothing, keep it simple. That's what I've always tried to do, keep it simple. And they see that, and this is all you need. This is the first house I've ever had that I've had an open kitchen, because I've always felt, I've never liked seeing what goes on in the kitchen. But I knew I couldn't have enough room here to have a wall and all that sort of thing. So one thing that I knew it would make me do is keep it clean and straight, keep everything out of sight, which I have done. It makes me put things away, which is good.
It is good.
Yeah, it really is.
My wife tells me that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have the kitchen right out in the living room and have a lettuce leaf and stuff like that all out there. It's been an interesting experience for me to live like this, because I haven't done it. I've always done this, had the kitchen separate. But,
so it's been okay to be your own client?
Yes.
And was it easy to get a builder down here who could understand this kind of design?
This is the fourth house. The fourth house I've had for myself, and probably one of the easiest I've ever had to build. I did a similar thing in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, and that was 1,600 miles away, and I started by saying I'll just go to the best builder there is. So I asked around, same here, who are the best builders, and they gave me 3 or 4 names. So I went to this one that everyone said was the best. And it was a good experience starting. But as we got into it, I could tell that maybe he wasn't that interested because it was small. And I said to him, he said, "Oh, no, that's not it. No." But he said, on into it, he said, "Would you mind if I showed these drawings to a friend of mine who's a builder? We help each other occasionally, and maybe he would be fine." So I said, "No, of course not." So he gave me this person's name, and I spoke to him, and in the meantime, Paul had been in Panama on a surfing trip with his family. He met somebody down there at this little place he was staying from St. Augustine. He was a builder. So he said, "You got to talk to him." So I talked to them both, and they were both very good. That guy was from St. Augustine, that's 60 miles away. And this guy was from here. He's local. And the prices were virtually the same. So I chose a local guy. And it was, once again, one of the best decisions I ever made. He instantly got it. And he was excited about it because he said, "I don't ever get a chance to build a house like this. Wood and that. So everything's concrete block and stucco and arches and that kind of thing down here." And so he was thrilled to do it. He's been wonderful. He really was. And he had his guys that worked with him felt the same way. I had one guy did all the finishing inside, everything. They were just terrific. It was a very good experience. I didn't come down here more than twice while it was being built.
That's amazing.
It is. And we did everything on telephone, and I kept telling him, I said, "This is a modern version of a Florida fishing camp. It's a really, granted with indoor plumbing and that kind of thing, but it's not anything so fine finished well." He insisted on mitering every corner, everything. I said, "You don't have to do it." "No, we want to do it." "Okay."
To give people a visual image, you approach the house and you have to figure out how to get in because it's like a hidden doorway in the cypress.
Yes, that's true.
And then once you do get in, there are these giant glass doors, I would guess about 8 feet by 10 feet, roughly. Is that it?
9 feet by 12 feet.
9 by 12. That the one side slides over, and you come into the large living room, dining room, kitchen area, which is about, I would guess, half the house, 500 square feet. Then the other half of the house are 2 identical bedrooms and 2 identical bathrooms that you walk in. And immediately what you see is that there's a shower ahead of you. And right behind that is a little access door to your outdoor shower. Mm-hmm. And you told me earlier you haven't used the indoor one very much.
No, I haven't, I haven't, but I wanted to do the bedrooms and bathrooms identical because I didn't need any more than that, and I always felt kind of funny putting the guests in something less than you had,
Yes.
Even though you were living there all the time. I didn't need any more space, so they're both the same, exactly the same. And they got little screen porches off of them, too, so it's worked out very nicely.
You can read about Harry's work and the work of Bates Mozzie in their new monograph, which came out late last year. And Harry, I really want to thank you for talking with me.
Thank you for coming. It's been a real pleasure.
Hey, thanks for listening. US Modernist Radio is underwritten by Sarah Sonk, who is still alive, by the way. The real estate agent who loves modernist houses just as much as you do. She's just angelic. 919-601-7339, and by the fine gentlemen at Quality Fabricators of Benson, the ones to choose when you have lots of money and terrible judgment. Okay, take us out, Tom.
Visit usmodernist.org for more information about the day's guests. US Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. US Modernist Radio is a production of North Carolina Modernist Houses, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. Catch our massive digital archives and previous episodes at usmodernist.org. And although Charlie Rose wishes he were drinking with Richard Meyer in their special Dominican Republic enclave every time he hears this show, George and Frank and I will be back in 2 weeks with another edition of US Modernist Radio.